you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
And welcome to Visiting the Village. My name is Paul Kilduff Taylor, and I'm joined, as ever, by the indefatigable Ian Hardingham.
Here I am, joining you for talking on a podcast.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's the top story.
Apparently, the Nintendo NX is going to use cartridges. Cartridges, Ian Hardingham.
This is great. I'm so excited that the top story today is us talking about cartridges. Very happy whenever anything uses cartridges, but given what Nintendo 3DS games look like, they don't look very different to memory cards. You know, they look a lot like an SD card, honestly. Like a big old SD card, not the micro SD cards. So are they even technically cartridges anymore? I mean, if it was the size of an N64 cartridge, that would definitely be news.
Yeah, I think this is a non-story. I'm kind of with you on this. I'm not sure that we're going to see a great resurgence of the wonderful chunky ROM cartridges, or even if this particularly means anything. I'm going to tenuously rope this into the hot stories of the week with the PlayStation Slim and Neo, or Pro, whatever it's called. I should probably know my PlayStations, right? It seems odd, you know, Nintendo are going ultra retro, while Sony are competing in this kind of modern era of variant console types. Are they just going to go further back in time? Are we going to see a Game Boy reissue?
Well, they've just partnered with Apple as of yesterday to do various different things, and their stock price went up a lot with that announcement. So I don't know. I mean, I think if you're making a handheld console, which the NX supposedly is, you probably do have to have removable media, I guess. I mean, maybe even that's a step too far, saying that. You know, I don't know if the next Vita would even bother having even a memory card slot for games. But, you know, if you think about the younger audience that Nintendo often has, and they kind of still want you to buy games on holiday or something, and they still really haven't totally got their storefront worked out.
No.
Their digital storefront, so they kind of need to sell you physical things. I'm still excited about the NX. This kind of this fake leaked image of what it might look like came out today. This week, it turned out to be someone on Reddit or NeoGAF or something that had just mocked it up, but looked kind of interesting. Still, you know, it's still an interesting idea to have removable controller bits from a handheld.
Yeah,
I'm kind of excited to see how that goes, because I was thinking, you know, is it just going to be face plates? Well, no, because it's not that, because you can take off the thing to play it remotely, so it's not that. So if they are going to sell separate ones, as I posited that you might get a Zelda-themed one,
yes,
it's going to have an analog stick in it.
Yes.
But I guess that's okay. I mean, that doesn't cost them that much to make that.
No, I'm still dubious about this. I saw a Kickstarter yesterday for something which I believe was called the Fidget Cube, and it's a tiny cube, and it just has different things on each face to fidget with. And one of them's like an analog stick thing. One of them is like 4 clickers from the top of a pen, like arrayed like the points of the number 4 on the dice. Look really good. I want to see a games console based on that. Maybe that's what the NX is. Maybe it's capitalizing on society's innate desire to fidget with the thumb and forefinger.
It's definitely possible. You never know what Nintendo's going to do next. We probably should be talking more about them partnering with Apple.
Yeah.
This was a pretty big announcement. They showed some Endless Runner or something, Mario Runs, and they're going to have Pokemon Go on the Apple Watch.
Yeah.
Which feels like they're 3 weeks too late for that to be a big deal. But, maybe there are children still playing Pokemon Go. It's a pretty huge deal to segue into a piece of news which is actually current.
Yes.
I mean, the idea, 5 years ago of Nintendo partnering with Apple is the kind of thing that you'd almost have someone make a fan fiction comic about.
Yeah.
It would be such an exciting concept. And now it's happened, no one's that surprised. I mean, I'm kind of bemused by that. I don't know how exclusive it's going to be. I really love to know who paid who money for this. It's a big deal.
I mean, this kind of thing really bothers me, because this was like the kind of number one analyst hot take topic from like 2013, was how Nintendo should be doing iOS stuff. And one of the problems with Nintendo is they are so slow to take advantage of these kind of cooperative things. They really want to do stuff with their own brand and control that, and then move their brand in these very specific defined directions. And we talked about how that's worked for them before. But when something is sometimes like a partnership, it's just really obvious that you should do it. And that's the kind of thing that you have to do, not necessarily super quickly, but at a good time. And this feels really late to me. Really, really late. I'm sure this Mario game is going to be good. The Me thing they did was cool. Pokemon Go is obviously cool. So I'm not saying that it's going to fail or anything like that. I'm not being as binary as that. But it just disappoints me that, like, you could be so switched off to the obvious play as a company as to miss that.
Yeah, definitely. It feels like you could have got a lot more value doing this maybe 5 years ago, before the App Store got so flooded.
Yeah. Back
when people would have had a lot more faith that Nintendo making games for an iPhone would actually make a difference. Maybe I'm in a minority, but I just don't feel like this is going to turn out a load of amazing new concepts. I mean, they've got a fairly good track record with Pokemon Go and whatever the Me Go before that. Both pretty interesting mobile concepts.
I can never remember the name of that Me thing. I can't
Maybe
remember.
it's Me Go, I don't know. Anyway, you cannot deny at this point that Nintendo can take a platform and they can make a game brilliantly designed around that platform in a way that is completely unparalleled. I don't know if this stuff is going to come to Android as well eventually. I don't know what this means for Nintendo's mobile strategy going forward. I think it would be sad if it was stuck in the Apple garden forever. It might lead to less good things than if they continued on all platforms. I just don't know where they're going to go. It does. I think it's a good business decision. Late, as you say, it does slightly make you wonder what the NX is now.
Yes.
How in Japan, mobile phones, as I understand it, are much less dominant in terms of gaming on the bus than they are in England. Kids much more likely to have a 3DS or another handheld in Japan. How is that positioned, and how does it feel to them internally when they think about when they're deciding to put a game on the NX or deciding to put it on the iPhone? Right.
Miitomo, for everyone who is screaming at their iPod, if anyone still has an iPod, which they don't. Yeah, that's a very good point. Where is the division between a straight-up mobile game and a mobile game that's going to suit your funny tablet with clip-ons? Because that's probably what we're going to get. I think all signs are pointing to that. So yeah, they have to figure out... They really need to do some stuff that uses the unique features of the NX in a good and meaningful way. And sometimes when Nintendo does stuff like that, it can be really good, and sometimes it can be really, really bad. So I am hoping that they actually embrace what they're doing, and they don't sort of hedge this middle ground between mobile and this device, as you're talking about.
Yeah, I want to see them do the NX all in, completely fully, because I love handhelds and I want to see what that's like, and that's much more exciting to me than them making more of these, excellent social /AR/experimental games on the iPhone. When it comes down to it, I'm still a traditional gamer who likes his joypad.
Yep.
And I definitely find a touchscreen phone a pretty suboptimal interface device for playing the kinds of games that I want to play. So that's kind of the root of why I'm not that excited about this in general. It's just because this is not going to lead to the kind of games that I want to play, and that's just me. So it's cool though. I mean, it's a surprising bit of forward thinking from both Nintendo and Apple here, I think.
Getting down to brass tacks, i.e. the things I care about. I care about the Nintendo franchises I care about are just Animal Crossing and Smash. They're the only two things that matter. And for both Animal Crossing and Smash, I think this is good news. An Animal Crossing phone game that isn't some amazingly neutered bullshit will be good. That's a good fit for phone, I think, because it's not sort of particularly timing based in any of the mini games or anything. So I think that could be good on the phone. Smash on the NX could be amazing. I really, really like the 3DS version of Smash. It's the best portable fighting game ever by a very long way. The main problem with it is that it's on the 3DS and the analog stick is so bad. So if the NX has good controls and there's a portable Smash on it, that will be very, very exciting to me. So in the small, tiny, tiny window of Nintendo fandom that I have, there's good things for Paul.
Yeah, Smash is probably the game I would be most excited about playing on the NX. I'm afraid I'm just completely with you. I cannot cope with the 3DS as an input device either.
It's just
very
bad.
Different reasons to the iPhone.
I mean, it's just bad. They made a bad choice for the stick. The buttons are fine, and the size is annoying, but the stick is just absolutely dire. And sometimes they do make the wrong call in terms of components. They always want to go for this sort of slightly cheap option with some things, and it didn't work. Whereas the Vita sticks are really nice.
Yes, they are.
So enough of that. PC Gamer has an article about trash items in games and their necessity. Now, because I'm a bad person, I haven't actually read all of this, but I'm assuming it's talking about, the kind of junk, the cruft that appears in your inventory in RPGs that you never really need and just takes up slots. I'm assuming that's what this is about. You can
I'm actually an equally, if not worse, person. So I haven't read any of this. I don't know how this slipped through my preparation.
It was on the list.
It definitely was on the list. So we need to talk about bad items in games while we desperately try and get over that. I haven't actually read this.
So a lot of this is about, it seems to be some different topics. So one of it is about weapons that are just bad, sort of hilariously bad, that you can pick up in a game. The Colovian Fur Helm in Morrowind. It's a game that it's a piece of armor you can get at the start of the game. It literally falls out of the sky, and it's completely rubbish. It just looks terrible. It doesn't do anything. So yes, bad items in games.
Yeah, no, I think it's fun. Stuff like this is actually kind of where Elder Scrolls is at its best. When it gets a bit more reduced from being this massive place that everything is like +1 or -1 of something and nothing feels particularly special. When it actually has some very bespoke special items that have some meaning. That's always the stuff that you remember in these games the most. And you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, you have something like Isaac or Spelunky, where every single item you can get is designed and iterated to the nth degree. And that's obviously a different thing. But really, when you're making a massive RPG or one of these incredibly emergent games, it's the well-designed little things that actually make the game different and don't just feel like one of a billion generated rings of the whale or something.
Yeah.
That you always remember, because that's the most exciting thing. And trying to find the balance in a game where the game feels huge and infinite and you can get lost in it, but you have these things which feel like they were artisanally designed. That's when you win.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting you bring up Isaac. There are definitely some things in Isaac which either weren't designed very well or kind of got phased out by the way the design worked. So there are some items that you just never take that are just pointless. They're basically always going to be worse than anything else you have. And that kind of thing is good because it really adds context. Similarly, Diablo is full of that kind of stuff. Stuff that you just shouldn't take. And I definitely like that. As you say, when it feels that something's over-designed, that something is sort of, everything's kind of tying into a particular schema, that doesn't seem... The human brain is designed to filter out stuff that isn't relevant a lot of the time. And if you're only provided with things that are relevant, that feels incredibly artificial. So I definitely agree with that. I kind of want to bring in a subject that I was arguing with various people about to do with No Man's Sky, unfortunately, which was an article came out and it said that what it would be good if No Man's Sky chose the next 50 planets that you were going to see. to make sure that you had a better experience. And that made me so angry, because the entire point of the game is that you're experiencing unconstrained generator. It's possible to get 100 terrible planets in a row. And if it were not possible, the entire atmosphere of the game would be completely different. So I do think you need badness, boringness, weirdness to give everything else context and meaning.
Yeah, it's actually... I mean, certainly... it's fundamentally undermining the game. The idea that it would give you a... I think the kind of the word for this kind of thing is usually the AI director.
Yes, that's
which
right.
is the sort of was coined as a concept in Left 4 Dead, and feels really exciting in some genres and feels completely out of place in others. Like this, or in this specific situation anyway. I mean, I think what you're trying to get at, to a certain extent, certainly a point I would like to make, is that these games are often just their most exciting when they're broken. You talked about enjoying having spawned near a planet which gave you kind of an unbalanced amount of something powerful, something that you could sell.
Yeah.
That is just a universally exciting feeling. And actually, I think a lot of the enjoyment of Elder Scrolls games like them, is trying to find that feeling where you feel like you through a combination of luck, which every human likes, and sort of exploits, and being a bit sort of sneaky, you've managed to get a different experience. But the funny thing is that everyone wants to feel that way. They want to feel that the game is meant to be X hard, and due to some combination of glitch and luck, they've managed to find a way for it to be a bit less hard and kind of more enjoyable in a weird way. And I think trying to harness that is really actually kind of important. And also really difficult, because if you look at all the patches for Morrowind, they just made the game more boring.
Yes.
Because doing weird things that involved selling 1,000 shells to a farmer that lives next to the lake is awesome. And they make all the good stories for the game. Removing that, like Oblivion removed all that stuff, and it just became boring. So I think they've gone on the wrong track for that. You want so many different weird things to be possible and emergent. And balancing them by removing all of the OP things is the wrong approach.
Yeah, absolutely. That happened in a No Man's Sky patch as well. There's an item that you get, sort of quest item, that you get fairly regularly from one of the main paths. And if you sold it, it was worth something like 5 million units, which is probably, like, that's enough to get a good ship in one transaction. It's just ridiculous. And that got patched out in the first patch. And I read the patch notes. I was like, oh, that sounds really disappointing. If I'd got one of those and then sold it, I would have been so excited to get more of them. I would have built up this ridiculous bank of those things and just gone around with my fleet of ridiculous ships and felt great. So there's a point at which, you don't want something... I guess that's kind of a main quest item, so it's too obvious. But you do want those kind of things in the game. One of the reasons I like No Man's Sky is that every system in the game is really set up for you to have a happy accident like that. It's not directed. It doesn't make those things happen in the way that someone's predefined. It's gone, there's going to be a planet near the space station in every single system. And that means if that planet happens to be amazing, you can do little runs up and down from the space station to the planet. That's a really good bit of design, because it allows you to have a really good opportunity for that sort of, as you say, that kind of found exploit feeling. It's a bit cheesy, but it's not as cheesy as making it happen deliberately.
I think Happy Accident is a great name for a games company. Yeah, I think that I played a bit more Starbound, as we talked about on a couple of weeks ago. And what these games want you to do is they want you to kind of fall into this sort of addiction loop for 100 hours, where you're gradually increasing the number of inventory slots you have, etc., etc., etc. But what they tend to also have are worlds that are kind of deep enough that if you sort of take a remix of that game, which is not meant to last for 100 hours, but is meant to last for a couple of hours, and you kind of enable some of this more crazy stuff, you can have a really interesting, different experience. Actually, kind of something I'd like to be true of Frozen Synapse 2, where you have a couple of weird, different happy accidents every playthrough. Because maybe on one you manage to Hapanokos, a building that has a certain really powerful unit, but straight away, and that just completely colours your complete playthrough, so it's just really different every time.
Yes.
And that kind of thing can be really important to me. I think Nuclear Throne does a very good job of legitimising that with its where you choose your perks after every level up, and the perks you choose and the perks you are able to choose, because you can only choose one of a randomized 4 every time, really make a big difference to how your playthrough goes. Now that's it's great, but that's too limited in game design for a kind of thing that you'd want in a big RPG. It's so complicated. Trying to make all this stuff work is such an art form, and it's so hard to analyze it. But certainly, while I understand why everyone wants to make these Skinner's boxes 100-hour slow addiction loop things, they're also kind of the most boring thing you can possibly do with an incredibly well-modeled world.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's so interesting that the types of games that these things emerge from either tend to be very mechanically elegant or very mechanically bloated. So Nuclear Throne is interesting because each decision you make has such a big impact on the playthrough, and there are so many of these discrete decisions. Whereas in something like Morrowind, you basically get the same experience by limiting your own rule set. So if you say, oh, I'm going to try and make money by going and killing this bear and letting it respawn and killing it again and then going and making money from that, you've kind of made your own game with very, very constrained rules. So it's just interesting the extent to which constraint matters with this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that games that fall in the middle of that spectrum of not having extremely polished, extremely minimalist mechanics and don't have a proper sandboxy system, they're just the least interesting games, in all honesty, to me.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a lot of freedom, and they're obviously not also incredibly well polished. I mean, not to blow my own trumpet, but I think there's something to be said that FS, for instance, kind of manages to do both. It has a very emergent sort of set of things that can come out of a very simple rule set, whereas something like an Elder Scrolls game just tries and throws in as many different things that you can do as possible. And really, again, not to harp on this, but why, after you've managed to do that, do you then have to balance everything?
Yeah, right.
That just sounds really boring.
Yeah, I've never quite... I mean, balance in single-player games is always a bit weird to me. It's like you're trying to design out certain kinds of experiences that people can have. In competitive games, obviously, it makes a lot more sense because it stops being fun if everyone can just do the same thing. And in a competitive game, you want to win, so you'll do the most, immediate strategy to win. But in a single-player game, like, if a weapon is too powerful, like the sword, the cyber sword in Deus Ex 1 was ridiculous. I mean, it just one-shotted everyone. It had quite a long range for a sword, and it's a freaking stealth game, so you can walk up to people and one-shot them really easily. And that's amazing. Like, I wouldn't want to play... I really hope that's not been patched in this mod, so that when I get to it, I can do that again. I'm genuinely looking forward to having that experience again. And in a modern game, you'd patch that out straight away. It's daft. So...
the skill of making something like that work is making sure that the player is able to make a good choice about whether to use it or not in a subsequent playthrough. Because what you don't want is a situation where your game is so annoying if you don't do that. You have to do that. So that it's not easy to get it right, but
yes, what you shouldn't do is then redesign the later stuff so that if the player has the sword, then they have to do this, because that could really that's the kind of design thought that really fucks a game late on. If you warp it around, you try and overly design these experiences. It's really interesting. We got such a long way from such a poorly researched item. I feel like we justified ourselves.
What a happy accident.
Oh man. Tim Stone, writing for his regular column about war games on RPS, asked various publishers why their old games were still so expensive and why they haven't tried selling them at a lower price on Steam. Great thing to write about. 3 of them replied saying the price is still high because it's a very niche market. The games are still actively worked on. Also that war games don't sell that well on Steam. What do you think about these high-priced niche games?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm a big fan of Tim Stone, of his writing. I've been a fan of his since the PC format days.
Yeah.
I can understand someone like himself, fan of old war games, being frustrated that all of these old games are still $50. And obviously a lot of people would be unwilling to pirate this stuff, quite rightly so. These are games that had a lot put into them. And, I've got a bit of disposable income, but even I'm going to have trouble if the thing that I like to collect and play costs $50 every single time. So I completely understand his viewpoint on this, but I also completely understand the publisher's viewpoint in this. They've done the maths. They've looked at what it's like being on Steam, having Steam take 30% of their revenue and push their price down a little bit, and it doesn't work out for them. They do continue to support their games, although I think that argument is not true in all of these cases. I don't know if there's much else they can do. These are very niche games. They're very inaccessible, and in some ways they age really well.
Yes.
Because they're not about graphics. They're kind of like little, or big rather, board games. And board games don't get cheaper. That's a bit of a silly argument, but you kind of know what I mean. So I sympathise with both sides, but I think that the publishers are perfectly within their rights to do this.
Yeah, I mean, they're just playing a different game, no pun intended, from the rest of the games market. These games are they're for a very, very specific audience of players. I saw a really great presentation from a company called Matrix Games, who distributed Frozen Synapse 1, who are a niche wargame publisher. And they basically said that their audience is this very, very specific group of people who care massively about a certain set of things that almost nobody else in the world cares about. They had the way they kind of came across was that they had this great sort of very affectionate but pretty cynical relationship with their customers. Kind of like you would have with, like, you know, a really, really old friend. Like, you know the flaws of the old friend. You know when they're going to start talking about politics in an annoying way, but you fundamentally love them and you get on with them. That's how they felt about their customers. And if that's your relationship with your customers, you're going to be building stuff just for them. Stuff that is not going to bring in new people. It's not going to be accessible because that's not what these people want. And you can charge them a lot of money for it. And they're happy. If they like what they're getting at that price, they're happy to invest in it. They're happy to invest in you because you're doing something that they like. If there's a nice kind of cafe that I like going to and I know the people who run it and they do nice food and nice coffee, I'm happy to pay more there than I would pay for Starbucks because I don't want Starbucks to come and take over their premises.
Well, yes, indeed. I'm very happy about that diatribe. I mean, I think this is really about the people who aren't the super fans,
yes,
who would dearly like to play one of these very crazy old games, and they can't for cheap unless they hold out for a very rare sale. So I'm not sure what else there is to say about it. I think that, you know, some of these games get up in price, you know, even beyond $50, which is getting pretty high. But again, I'm just not sure what else you can do. Maybe there's a subscription model out there, or something like that.
Well, now, I think if you're one of these companies, I think businesses generally do need to do both things. They need to cater to their existing audience, and businesses that do that consistently, successfully tend to thrive and survive for a long time. But you do also need, at times, to think about bringing in new people, about broadening that audience. And you can very much separate those two things within your business so one doesn't affect the other if you're above a certain size. So I do think it might be good for some of these publishers maybe to pick one or two games that they think are better for beginners, and then make them a lower price and get people into their club, into their system. I do think you always have to kind of have an open door like that. So I don't think they should do this with every product. Maybe they should develop something that's a bit lighter that might, you know, get people into these games. I think that could happen. A lot more people playing strategy games now. Stuff like Paradox's games are really aimed at being very accessible and then ramping people up, but then they're never going to be as hardcore as these games. So perhaps there is a niche there as well.
Absolutely.
Jake Tucker has written a great, very in-depth article about what happened to failed MMO APB for Eurogamer. Now, I read this a couple of weeks ago, I think, and it just struck me how similar all of these stories are about these big failed projects. And it got me thinking, like, do you think this kind of thing can ever be prevented? It's happened so many times. Do you think it can ever be prevented?
I mean, I think basically every so often someone gets given the means with which to make their dream game. And if that's the first time you've been given that opportunity, this is what tends to happen. You don't have the experience of how to go through the process of making something big and exciting and very new in an effective way. And these people always have a lot of money put behind it for these stories. And it just tends to go very wrong. obviously, especially do with APB. I actually bought APB on the day of release because I was so intrigued by it. And it was, really just legitimately a disappointing mess. There are lots of games, like Daikatana, for instance, one of them. Daikatana is interesting to play.
Right.
APB was just a complete disaster, disappointing, didn't even say Zoldner every time you clicked on a menu item. It just didn't do anything particularly entertaining, and it was a lot of good stuff there. But they didn't even have client-side prediction for the vehicles. It's absolutely insane.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes.
And obviously it went off the rails, and despite having a very good concept people were very excited about, they couldn't get rid of the taint before it was released, and not enough people bought it, obviously. I think it's sad. I don't particularly think there's anything you can do, because I think that shepherding a project like this just requires an awful lot of a combination of individual talent but also good project management.
Yeah. The thing that always strikes me is this design problem. So one of the themes of this is that nobody knew what genre the game was until sort of near the end, if then.
Red flag.
Right. Well, yeah, but it's so... I mean, I guess that happens because people want to be seen to be innovating or working outside an existing genre, right? They want to be genre busting, which is effectively a good thing to be. But... And then you have this thing of, there was this idea that all the game design would be done on paper prior to prototyping. And someone who worked at the studio sent me a tweet, and he said that a lot of the time, the first year they spent on the game, they were writing documents, and he kept getting documents like refused because they had grammar errors in them, and he had to go back and rewrite the documents. I mean, that's so crazy. Is that just insecurity about project management? Is that trying to do the right thing and actually doing the wrong thing?
I mean, I have no idea about that.
Yeah.
We've never really been strong on pen and paper design at all. It's never been something that we've done a lot of. So I don't even know what that process is like. Trying to work out what a game's going to feel like from a 100-page design document has just never seemed to work for me, unless you know so intimately what the genre is.
Yeah.
You can imagine this is like World of Warcraft, but instead of this tree being like this, it's like this. In which case, maybe you can imagine that. It feels like you've got to prototype it, but I mean, this is something that you and I, and especially I, do all the time. Try and make something new in a reasonable amount of time and good. And it's just an iterative process. The problem with these team sizes is that you've got to have 100 people working all of the time. And you just don't know what you need. You don't even know what the animation needs are. Yeah. Having the artists shouldn't be on the payroll for the first year of something like this, because the coders should be getting the base technology, and then the game designers should be making that work. I mean, and I think that's one of the things that causes big problems, is that by trying to do things in parallel, which you obviously do to save costs, you end up sort of losing more money in progress, and you get stuck in ruts that you find it hard to get out of because you're so invested. I mean, if I was going to make something like APB, I would still want to only have 3 or 4 people working on it for the vast majority of the time. Yeah. Because otherwise, how do I keep my sanity?
That just makes sense to me. I mean, I talked a bit about this recently for various reasons as well. I think one of the problems is in these bigger projects, you need to have something that looks like a game really early that you can show to people for various different reasons. And I think that also causes you to double down on this sort of overly parallel working thing. So you kind of have to design this sub-game early on that looks good. And designing something that immediately looks good is a really bad way to design game mechanics. So that tends to be an influence on this stuff as well. But I just agree with you. Like, I would really love to hear a story about one of these games where it's like, yeah, we had 4 people working on it for 2 years, and then we ramped up to a team of 250. How amazing would that be? I'd love to see a game made like that.
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, I'm not disciplined enough to do this, but if you want to make something very exciting and new, like, say, APB wanted to be, you do need to, I think, just get the elevator pitch. So, basically, MMO Counter-Strike with vehicles, let's say it's that. And you basically just have to print that in massive letters on your wall, and you have to make sure that every decision you make is going towards that.
Yeah.
I recently was reminded of what Google's mission statement is. It's something like make as much information as easily accessible to as many people as possible. And whenever they have anything where they don't want to do, they literally just go, what is the thing to do that goes most towards that mission statement?
Yeah.
And that's the only way when you're designing a game that takes 3 years to do that you can stay on track is if you remember what the mission statement is, because you're going to get bored of that mission statement. You're going to forget it. You're going to think that upgrading to the latest version of Unreal is the most important thing to do next, or maybe you want to have platforming elements. If you're going to have the discipline to actually do this, then you need to remember what that elevator pitch is. Initially make sure it's exciting to people and exciting to you, and then you just need to execute it, and you need to block yourself off from doing anything else, and that's how you can get it done.
Values like that are really important with something creative, especially something that takes a long time, because if you don't, it's like going through life and having no morals. If you don't have any morals, it's really hard to make decisions, because you just come to the next decision and you're like, well, what would be fun now? And then you just do what's fun, and then you end up in a huge disaster. So if you don't have values, especially, I'm just thinking from a music point of view, if you keep trying to change the genre of track that you're making, you don't really know the genre, you get sort of to the middle where you have some of the key elements and you're just starting to do production, you're like, well, I kind of want to put in like a 10-minute drum and bass section in the middle. That's going to be bad. Like, it's that keeping the purity of the initial idea and sort of being almost naive enough to not overanalyze it. As you say, if people like the idea, then that's great. But you have to be able to hold on to like kind of almost an innocence about the idea for like 4 years or whatever it is with the game in order to make it well.
And people respond to that so well.
Yeah.
If you look at classic films and classic games, they really are often the things which just have a singularity of vision, and that can get you past a lot of things that are wrong.
Yes.
With what you're doing, basically. If you care so overwhelmingly that every single shot in your film conforms to some weird value, people will notice and people will like it.
Yeah.
Because it's got real value to it. So yeah, I don't want to go too far down this, but definitely, one of the worst things you can do is spend your entire time being like, what would people like to happen here? Like,
yes.
what is the thing people would want most to happen? Because that just ends up not being an interesting thing. People want to be told what they like by a really consistent, confident product, and getting that balance right is really hard. But yes.
This is why, this is the kind of healthy degree of arrogance that you want when you're creating something. You want to just have the idea and believe that the idea is right. So many people get into conflicts. You see this with writers as well, a lot, particularly. They have to do long form projects and they get to the middle of what they're doing and they forget why they're doing it. And you can really read in novels where someone's just lost, the plot. Not necessarily the plot, but the themes. They lose the themes. They don't understand why they're doing anything. So trying to hold on to that stuff is really important. And in these big games, it tends to get lost.
Yeah, write down your pitch and just have the faith to stick to it.
Lee Pullen spoke to a number of people who have left negative Steam reviews after playing a game for many hours. I like this topic. The most common response was that the players wanted to signal to the developers that a recent change to the game had left them unhappy. There's a whole load of different reasons in this, though. What do you think about these late negative reviews?
Yeah, games developers, especially indie games developers, are very offhand on Twitter about
yes.
a guy who's given a negative review of Rust or something after having played 800 hours.
Yeah.
And that's just nonsense. You can play something for 800 hours and be annoyed about it.
Yes.
I mean, it's like, yes, sort of sensibly speaking, if you've managed to enjoy a game enough to play it for that long, it's totally been worth your money. And it's probably it should be one of your favourite games of all time, really. But that doesn't mean that you can't have spent the entire time kind of like mildly hate playing it, because it just about scratches your itch. But there are so many things about it that you don't like. I mean, I'm trying to think, but there are certainly TV shows that I've watched because I can cope with watching them, but so much of each episode annoys me. That definitely happens. There's nothing wrong with doing it. I mean, the question then is, does your review, is it accurate to say that you don't recommend this game?
Right.
That you spend 800 hours on? I think that's a tough question.
Well, the thing with that is that people don't see it as a recommendation. They just see it as an expression of how they feel at a very base level. So there are things where there are certainly games that I've played where they're good games and they're entertaining, but they have a very big trough. And the trough is like maybe at 10, 15 hours. And I know some of these reviews are like crazily like 1,000 hours or whatever. But I can actually, if you're the kind of person that plays a game for, say, 60 hours or 40 hours, and you're used to doing that, I can imagine that lots of games get really bad sort of in the middle of that time period, and you want to kind of push through it. And that's an okay thing to be annoyed about. Like, you're just saying that for me, as this kind of player, it's not working at this point. That's completely fine. And developers do need to respect that a bit.
These games are designed to be addictive for long periods of time. We talked about it before. If you talk about something like The Division or Fallout 4, they're designed to be compulsive and sort of entertaining in a way that keeps you playing. And the way they do that is getting towards the point where it should no longer be a surprise if I've played Fallout 4 for 40 hours and basically think it's a bad game, which is the case for me. Like, I come home from work, I'm tired and I want to chill out for an hour. I might put on The Division or Fallout 4 and play for an hour, just because it's something that I can do that doesn't require much brain power, that gives me some kind of satisfaction. And I'm still completely free to think that Fallout 4 is the worst game that Bethesda's made. Like, and it just because you're playing it, that's what they want you to do, is play it.
Yeah.
You know, and if they all they cared about was that every minute you played a game you were loving it the most you possibly could, they would design these games very differently. So again, I just don't particularly have a problem with it. You know, it's amazing kind of feedback if your game's still in early access and someone's played it for 100 hours and they don't like it. Just try and listen in the right way.
Yeah, I'm accused a lot on the internet of being too pro-developer. And I think this is something where developers do actually need to do a bit more listening. I mean, I also think it's fine to make... If someone's 1,000-hour Steam review is like, it's boring and you're dumb, then yes, screenshot that shit and put it on Twitter, that's fine. But also, like, you have to translate this a bit. A lot of developers are too thin-skinned, and they just see the negative review and they see the complaints. They're like, oh, it's another one of these idiots. And while that can often be true, there are things that you can learn from this stuff. Also, you know, in the past, games are very much about, you know, ship it, get good reviews and forget it. And now we're in the time where you do want those people who play your game for the rest of their life to be important to you, and you have to listen to what they say. And unfortunately, it's very hard to make a game good for that length of time, but you've got to get better at it.
Exactly. Grow up, developers.
According to a survey by PC Gamer, 90% of PC gamers have pirated a game during their life, and 35% of them are currently pirating games. Does that surprise you in any way?
No, none of the results of this survey particularly surprising, but it's a great survey. Lot of people. It's a good sample size, and it dispels some myths. It basically shows that yes, it matters if you have lower income. That means you're more likely to pirate. It's somewhat based on where you're from, but basically just to the extent to where that correlates with your general level of income may be. Funnily enough, you're not particularly more likely to pirate based on your age, funnily enough. I just thought this was really interesting. You know, I think the vast majority of people have pirated games. I've certainly pirated games in the past.
Yep.
And, you know, to talk about semantics here, I think a lot of people would say if you're pirating a game that you literally cannot buy. So I was pushed into a situation where the only way I was able to play Sim Golf last week was downloading some ROM from my abandonware site. I think most people would say that's at the very least a grey area. You're laughing at me. Do you want to disagree with that?
No, just the idea of you being on like Home of the Underdogs and like.
Well, I got linked to it by Twitter. Some lovely guy showed me the zip to get, and then HD from our chat channel made a VM or something. It was all very nice and community based. Anyway, so we're not talking about that kind of pirating. Is what I'm trying to say very slowly. Actually, yeah, you do pirate more as you're younger. Sorry, that is what this data's saying. Or if you're very old, apparently. Anyway, yeah, people pirate stuff. It's still a massively active part of PC gaming. I sort of slightly hesitate to say this on air, but there's still an aspect to piracy which I like. I really like that the people who really legitimately can't afford games still get to play them.
Yeah.
There's something about that I like. It's the people who can afford to and just... the people who really annoy me are the people who pay subscriptions to services that are designed to make piracy easier. That's the worst sort of thing as far as I'm concerned. But I'm certainly not as anti-piracy as some of our game development friends.
No, I feel the same. I mean, my relationship with it is interesting. Games, I didn't pirate that much. I'm trying to think. I mean, I did when I was a kid. Like, you could just copy the game and you had, like, the no CD hack and stuff. I used to do that. It's interesting. One of the interesting stats on here is that 47.9% of players say that they purchase a game after pirating it more than 50% of the time.
Yes, let's focus on this. This is probably the most interesting statistic, I agree.
Yeah. And that, I mean, yes, obviously people are going to lie about that, so I don't think it's a very accurate measure necessarily, but like you say, it's a big sample size. So at least there's a large number of people who would like to believe that that's their behaviour.
Yeah, let's just be specific about what these stats are saying. They asked 47,700 respondents. How often would you say you've purchased a PC game after pirating it? 11% said never. A third said rarely. Just about half said more than 50% of the time. And 7% said they always did.
Right.
I'm a little dubious about this. I think this is the how big is your penis part of the questionnaire. I think it is the one that is going to be answered least truthfully.
Yes, I agree. Yep.
My opinion on this is that if you've ever bought a game after pirating it, you are quite likely to say that you do that more than 50% of the time.
Yes.
Because I think it is part of the justification of people who really do believe that they're totally okay pirating a game, as long as they buy the ones that are worth buying after pirating it. And that's a very problematic group, I think. But yeah, this is the most interesting part of the survey for me.
Definitely. I mean, piracy it's such a difficult thing. There is also the element to which, as you say, some people really can't afford games and they get them this way. The idea, I mean, I'd much rather have our games pirated than nobody play them. Or in the future, if you can't get hold of them or something, I'd much rather that they be out there, just in terms of, that we spend a lot of our lives making them, and that's important. Similarly with my music, which is extremely heavily pirated, most of the notifications I ever get about my music are just new torrent links of it going up. That is annoying on some level, but also it's inevitable with music, and it's great that people listen to it. And I do think it brings people in. I have had quite a few people tell me that they pirated it and then they wanted to pay me $50 like 10 years later or something. That's great. I love all of that stuff. So it is very difficult. It's a complicated one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our games have significant multiplayer portions, which make them harder to pirate, so it's easier for us to be a bit more serene about the stuff with that. And Steam has also made it a lot better, because it means that so many more people who can afford to buy games do buy games. So really, Steam has been massively important in making the number of sort of problematic piracies lower, I think, to the point where it's not a situation that particularly bothers me right now. Again, it's so nice to think that if you've got some people in parts of the world who really just barely have enough money to eat, but they are able to they're not completely precluded from playing new computer games. I know that's sort of a weirdly communist thing to say, but there's something nice about that.
The only thing I want to say to people is that if you pirate a game and you really enjoy it, it is worth just making the effort if you can afford to pay for it, because every sale of a game encourages that developer to make more. Even if that developer doesn't make much money, every single sale of the game, if I look on Steam sort of real-time stats and I see 2 people buy the game at lunchtime or something, that's really motivating to me. Like, people are actively going out and paying us money to keep doing this. And ultimately, when we started, that's all we wanted, was to be able to make a living and make more games, have enough money to make more games. So it does matter if you make that payment, even though we're saying, in some situations it's okay and that it's something that is generally tolerated. that's the approach that I would like people to have to it.
Yeah, it's actually really hard making good video games. I'd like to say that we're pretty good at it. We put everything that we have into doing it. So it is lovely to be paid for it when that can happen.
CCP announced on their blog that from November, you'll no longer have to pay to play EVE Online. Free players will be limited to a certain subset of ships and skills, which I find quite amusing. It will take them longer to acquire skills, which sounds absolutely terrible. Do you think this is going to have any particular impact on EVE?
On EVE, yeah, I do. I think that we've got loads of examples of decent subscription-based MMO games going free to play and having a massive spike that often lasts quite a long period of time. And I don't see why that wouldn't be true for EVE. EVE's a very big IP in gaming land. It wasn't until I saw this announcement that I remembered that I'm never going to play a game that has a subscription. Like, that's just so turning off to me. FTP is actually less turning off to me than that. I want to be able to buy a game and then play it at my leisure. So I think there'll be lots of people who will get into EVE Online, and EVE Online is a really good game from everything I hear.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be really good for EVE.
I think so. I suppose I'm slightly... EVE was always this really weird outlier. It was a bit like the strategy games we talked about earlier. It was persisting at being like a pure subscription MMO. And I think there's something about this which is a little bit sort of a sign of the times. You know, that era is completely gone now and whatever. So that's fine. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It is going to be interesting to have masses of very new players in EVE. I don't know what that's going to do to the existing player base. It probably is good for the game because it's sort of a kind of pyramid-ish structure, so lots of newbies bimbling around in sort of high security space or whatever will probably be good for the game. It did make me want to go back and try playing it again, but that's, you know, I got a surprisingly long way last time. I got through most of the main tutorials, which is a big effort in EVE, and I really liked it, so maybe I'll do that. It's still a very, very intriguing, interesting game, and there's nothing else like it. It's never had a competitor.
Yeah, you know, it's just fundamentally we both know how much grinding it takes to get anywhere with EVE, and that's frustrating. Like if I open up Second Life, if Second Life is still even a thing, that's not a game that requires grinding. Really, that's a game you can go out and experience something very strange straight away.
Yes.
Whereas I really feel like, while I will give EVE a go, I feel like there's almost no chance I'll get anywhere near the point where really interesting stuff starts happening. And that's sad, but that's just kind of the model of things.
Yeah. I wanted to play WoW. I don't think WoW is free to play now. You get like a free month or something. And the subscription for that does put me off. It does make me think like, well, if I invest any time into this, I'm going to have to start shelling out loads of money to pay
it's
a
a
WoW
lose-lose.
subscription.
You either don't get into the game or you have to pay £12 a month for it.
Yeah, it's no good. I'm going to talk about Interplay next, if that's all right with you, because we have an item. We have an item about Metroid Prime Federation Force, which I know nothing about, so we can talk about that.
The only thing about that is that Nintendo released this Metroid game on the 3DS, and it flopped. And I was just interested because obviously Metroid's a very popular IP.
Yeah,
they released a video for this game, and all of the fans tried to sign a petition for them not to make it. They were so upset with the action direction they'd taken this in.
Oh god!
And it launched on its week of launch. It was number 16 in the 3DS sales charts for a first-party Metroid game, which is very good going. So I thought a very unusual situation of a gigantic Nintendo IP doing really badly.
That is interesting. Okay, we should talk about this then. I didn't realize it was first party. I guess it necessarily has to be. That's pretty amazing. I think there's been a few sort of mistaken... Metroid seems to be the IP that gets the worst shrift with a lot of these things. Maybe Mega Man fans will tell me I'm talking nonsense there. I just don't know if they... So what kind of... Is this a 3D game? Yes, it is. Oh, it looks bad. It really does look bad. Well, I understand why people are angry. A petition to not make something is quite innovative, I think.
Yeah, really impressive.
Good. All right. Well, there's that. Let's talk about Interplay now. So Interplay are having a gigantic auction of a huge variety of different older IPs. Descent are among them, Free Space, Kingpin, Giant Citizen Kabuto, which I know you were a fan of, MDK, Sacrifice, Earthworm Jim is apparently in this roster. So there's various things. Interplay actually ended up owning quite a lot of stuff from that era of games. And these auctions, IP auctions, happen quite a lot, but they're not normally as well publicized as this one.
A lot of interesting stuff here. I definitely think, if I was a betting man, I think Descent and Free Space and Earthworm Jim and MDK will be bought by someone. I think those are really big names. And we know that Derek Smart wants Free Space. Apparently, according to you, Hardware is unlikely to be part of this because they don't actually own the rights to Hardware, which is a pity because I would probably sell my cat and my wife to get hold of the Hardware IP.
Mm. Yes.
Giant Citizen Kabuto, I think, is probably an IP with almost zero value, in all honesty, apart from maybe re-releasing the old one.
Right.
And Sacrifice is cool, but I think Sacrifice in an alternate universe has enough value to be like something that you could remake in a really interesting indie way, but probably isn't quite well known enough.
I just want to give all of these to Night Dive and have them, make remakes, modern remakes of all these games, so that I can play them. I mean, yeah, IP nostalgia is not generally something I have. Like, I don't want to... I mean, I guess I'll watch anything that has Ghost in the Shell in the title, even if it's bad. I suppose, even if I know it's bad. I watched Ghost in the Shell, the new movie, which is not supposed to be very good, but it was still a lot better than most other things. Stuff like that. But so I'm not going to get excited if some random company buys MDK and makes like the Deus Ex Human Revolution version of MDK. That just sounds boring to me and another sort of rehashing.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's not going to lead to something exciting. I mean, I think that Free Space is the one that could lead to something exciting.
Sure.
Because I think if you made a space game with a lot of the values of Free Space, I think that would be good.
Mm.
Earthworm Jim, I mean, I don't think that's going to lead to something good. Descent, yeah, if you had a team that had a really good Descent alike, and you made it into Descent, that would be cool. If you just made a mod of the original Descent and sold that, I'd be all on board with that as well.
All right, good. That's enough of that. I'd like to sashay briefly into the film and television lounge area, and we can talk about Stranger Things, because I think most people who were going to watch Stranger Things have probably watched it now.
Spoiler warnings.
Yeah, if you haven't, then you'll be wanting to skip this section, and we're not going to tell you when this section ends. So, see you next week.
Go and listen to a different podcast.
Sorry, it's only the charts after this, and they're shit. Stranger Things is one of the most hyped TV series of our time. I think it's fair to say. It's very good. I enjoyed it. You liked it a lot. What do we think about it?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I think hyped is a problematic term. I mean, it landed amidst almost no hype when it was released, and then sort of very quickly became the favourite thing of an awful lot of people. So I suppose that counts as hype in this day and age. I thought it was excellent. I thought the first episode was kind of weirdly subpar, because usually it's not usually the first episode that is subpar in the way that the first episode of Stranger Things is subpar. It's got, for me, much worse cinematography and writing than the rest of the series, which I just found a bit strange. Maybe that was just me. I really liked it. I thought it was an unusual format for a TV show. I liked the arty elements of it. I liked the performances. I just liked it.
I think the first episode tried to introduce all the characters, so it kind of got stuck with doing character introductions, and it focused a lot on Winona Ryder's character, who is by far the worst character in the show, with the exception of Eleven. So that was a
shots fired.
She's a really bad character. Winona Ryder has a massive job to pull that character through the utterly terrible plot arc that she has. I'll just give you one example. So the entire first half, the first episode and the first half of the second episode are her being hysterical because her son has gone missing. they have a scene which is intended to show you a different side of the character, to redeem her, to make her seem more proactive and robust, which is the scene where she goes to the store and she asks to get her employee discount from the store. But the problem is she's been directed to play that scene in the same way. So she does it like being hysterical the whole time, and then finally has one line where she like tells the manager to do something. And that is the entire nuance of that character is one line versus probably 4 episodes of her just going crazy about her missing son. It's just not good enough. Like, there are some really nice nuanced characters in the show who get lots of balance. For example, Nancy, who has loads of different scenes and gets to be badass with a gun at various points, but also gets to be kind of that stereotypical teenage girl from a horror film. She has these lovely balanced scenes, and Winona Ryder is a bit wasted in that role, I think.
Sure, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, certainly, it's not like I love her performance. I think it's definitely, I think it's more the writing of her character that is, as you say, kind of just a bit difficult to watch. Yeah, and 11, I just don't just not kind of massively into that kind of thing. Really liked the scenes of her in the completely black space.
Yes.
Standing on water. I thought that was really nice visual design.
Yeah.
Music's great. The titles are great.
The music is amazing. I love the music. I mean, this is a hard thing for me to love because it's kind of in an area, it's completely synthesized. It's trying to sound like late 70s to mid 80s analog synths, but a bit modern. It's just really, really good. I don't know who did it, but they're brilliant.
Yeah, so a really nice surprise. They are apparently doing an Indiana Jones style thing for the next series.
Yeah.
Which is cool with me because I don't really want to see them doing this again. And I would love to see them do a tribute to the Temple of Doom, in all honesty.
Sure.
So I'm just cool with that. I really think Netflix's original programming has had some real standouts. And that's where they're winning for me. I really liked whatever the Will Arnett thing was that you didn't like much.
Oh no, I quite like that. Wasted.
Yeah, something like
that. Is that what it's called?
We both liked the first few episodes of that Seinfeld-esque thing with Aziz Ansari.
Yes, a master of none. Yeah.
They just keep releasing TV shows that are both watchable and are not. They're not derivative of other TV shows, to me, and that's something that I want. I mean, even The Get Down, which is the messiest thing you've ever seen, is kind of watchable.
Yeah,
and I kind of want to be able to turn on a series which just doesn't make me feel like it's every other series ever, but is also possible to watch without throwing yourself off a building, which is not true of Sense8, for instance.
Oh my god! Ugh.
So Netflix wins.
Flaked, not wasted.
Flaked. That's right.
The final thing I want to say about Stranger Things, the pastiche stuff, I just thought it was okay. It did make the whole series kind of a bit light for me. Like, I didn't feel very invested. It wasn't something that I watched to be invested in the characters or in the plot. I kind of settled on the fact the plot wasn't going to really do anything exciting. It was just going to play out in this very standardized way and kind of as an homage.
I think
to all
in
that
general stuff. I think it's very hard for a pastiche to work for you personally.
Yeah.
I think you're just, for whatever reasons, not particularly into that kind of thing. I'm much more likely to take a pastiche of a thing that I don't know anything about, like for instance Carpenter films, and just kind of get on board with whatever they're selling as what that thing was about, and just kind of enjoy it in a sort of slightly mindless way. So it's not. I don't think it's a sort of an instant negative in the way it often is for you, for me. And I quite like things which are pastiches. I like a well done pastiche, which is a combination of referential stuff. That sort of just works for me personally.
I just find it's sort of necessarily style over substance. It keeps drawing attention to its form and then not doing anything particularly interesting with that form. If it's kind of comedic, then it can work. But a sort of earnest pastiche, it doesn't work for me because it's trying to get me to both buy in and sort of be like, oh, look, it's a Jaws poster. Like, if I'm trying to think about maybe a character and then it's like, hey, do you want to go and see Poltergeist? It's just that takes me out immediately. I'm not really sure what it's trying to do. Is it trying to undermine that emotional experience, or is it trying to give it to me? And so it confuses me. I'm not sure which way I'm supposed to react to it.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's just full of semiotics, so I don't think they're sure of it either. I think it's just about trying to create a feeling without going through the process of, of being, specific about it, which, again, I understand is a thing that you're very against, and I can understand that. It's just like, if we throw enough weird 80s movie posters at the wall, then we're hoping that our audience will feel a certain way.
Yeah, I do think that's crass. Kind of innately, it's very cheap, and I'm just trying to think, would I have preferred this without that stuff? It's very difficult to know. I mean, the stuff that works is where they manage to really accurately recreate the things that those movies did well. So it definitely uses the material that it's borrowing from really, really well. The way they handled the monster is such a kind of classic structure of how they do that, and it's really good. So it's this, when you take underlying structure, I think it's good. It's just when you take the sort of overt trappings of it and wave them at the viewer, I find that a bit distracting.
Fair enough.
That's enough of that. Right.
Well, we're going to seg, and I'm actually going to wave goodbye.
Yes.
As I go off to deal with my life. But you've only have to listen to Paul doing the charts and last decade. So thank you for listening to me. Goodbye.
Right. Have a good one. Hello, dear listeners. It's Paul time. It's time to listen to me talk about games that I haven't Googled yet. In my favourite part of the show, the games that were released this week in 2006, thanks to Eurogamer and producer Jimmy. And our first game this week is And One Street Ball on the PS2, which I'm now going to Google on Wikipedia. And One Street Ball is a street ball video game for PlayStation 2 and Xbox, developed by Black Ops Entertainment and published by Ubisoft. It doesn't look very good, I have to say. I guess there are a few. NBA Street was the big franchise in this area. I'm sure that's trying to compete with that. Dance Factory on PS2. It can generate dance moves from any music CD. I remember this era of dance games. They were particularly boring. Def Jam Fight for New York, The Takeover on the PSP. This was the weird rapper fighting game, which I think was moderately successful because they seem to keep making sequels to it. And there was a PSP version. There's plenty of weird games on the PSP. It might even be worth buying a PSP now for these weird games. Gangs of London on the PSP. It's a very PSP-rich week. Gangs of London, however, did not look particularly good. During the course of story mode, the player is given a wide variety of objectives. One objective may require entering a nightclub armed with a jackhammer. Well, that sounds lovely. That sounds really good. Gitaru Man Lives on the PSP. Never played a Gitaru Man game. I know a lot of people were kind of into them. Gitaru Man. That's the sum total of my thoughts on that. Dungeon Siege 2 Broken World on the PC. 62 Metacritic. Not the most popular Dungeon Siege game. And Birth of America on the PC from Matrix Games. In fact, the publisher we were discussing earlier. This is a very hardcore, sort of almost hex-based strategy game. Very nice. That's enough of that. Gleefully, a short week this week, and we'll segue into the current week's top 10 UK Steam games. And at number 10, it's Football Manager 2017. Hooray to the Football Manager team. And apparently they've been having trouble with the number of players on free transfers after the transfer window closed. So I hope they got all that sorted out. Number 9, it's Counter-Strike Go. Number 8, Titan Quest Anniversary Edition, 75% off. Has been recently updated. I've just realised I don't really know what Titan Quest is, so I'm going to look at this on Steam. Titan Quest. It looks like a Diablo-alike to me. It's an ARPG. So yes, it is indeed a Diablo-alike. Well, if you like that sort of thing, then you'll probably like that. RimWorld at number 7, which Ian has got and I've not played. God Eater 2 Rage Burst at number 6. Let's take a quick stealth Google of this. Why is that placed so high on Steam? God Eater 2 Rage Burst. It looks like some kind of anime RPG fighting game. You just need to make an anime game, basically. That's how you get in the Steam Top 10 these days. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt Game of the Year Edition, friend of the show Malakian's favourite game at number 5, Dragon Age Origins Ultimate Edition at 75% off at number 4, Prison Architect at 75% off, recently updated number 3, The Game Will Not Die, Introversion, probably off buying Islands to Live On right now. Deus Ex Mankind Divided at number 2, Total Warhammer, The Grim and the Grave, DLC released today at number 1. I didn't think DLC could get to number 1 anymore, but maybe I'm just being naive. Well, no listener questions this week, as I forgot to ask. Extremely organised as ever. If you do have questions you'd like us to answer on the podcast, they can be general ones about the games industry, game design, or in fact anything that takes your fancy, judging by the huge swathe of idiotic responses I generally get when I ask for questions. Please just tweet to me at Mode7Games. You can tweet me any old nonsense. It'll just help to stem the tide of abuse from angry people on forums. Yes, follow me on Twitter, Mode7Games, and you can follow Ian on Twitter at Ian Hardingham. That's it for this week. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.